All right, there we have it now. The second college football playoff rankings are ours to have and to hold. What do we think about those rankings? Maybe a better question is, what do those rankings tell us in response to what we can expect when it comes time for those final rankings for the college football playoff to be revealed to us in this 12-team format? Glad to have y'all here. A lot going on. Wednesday, November 13th, 2024, last one on the face of the planet. As I mentioned, we're going to get into those rankings a little bit. If you're new to the show, every single Wednesday right here, live in living color, 11 a.m. Eastern, we give you our hotel playoff. So we take those rankings, we appreciate those rankings, we factor in those rankings, but do those rankings tell us the whole story? No. So we'll go through who's in the penthouse for the college football playoff. We'll go through some teams that are in the lobby and have a chance to make the college football playoff, but maybe, just maybe, got to give a little bit of that extra push to find their way into the playoff penthouse. Then a couple of teams now, we're getting to that point of the year where some teams I would say are what we call waiting on a reservation, probably need some help. Surprisingly, a thin group right now, waiting on a reservation. Translation, a lot of teams are in it here in the month of November. It's what you wanted, what you got. If you were a fan of the 12-team playoff, then we'll also check in on the G5 party as we always do. A lot of y'all got at me on the social platforms, specifically Twitter, that is, or X, whatever you want to call it right now, and hit us with your college football playoff hypotheticals. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, essentially I'm asking you, hey, what is the scenario that maybe boggles the mind a little bit and you're not sure who would get in? If, in fact, we got, call it 6 teams from the SEC that were 10-2. Hey, is it possible for an 11-1 Penn State or an 11-1 Indiana to somehow, some way not make the college football playoff? One of y'all hit us with that hypothetical, had my mind spinning a little bit. And we did our very best to get to the bottom of it, so we'll answer that one a little bit later. And then I got a strong take on Texas, man. I think they're I think they're a college football playoff team. That's pretty much everyone's opinion at this point in time based on what they've done. But I think Texas, they're like a top 4 kind of team when it comes to the college football playoff. I think Texas is one of those teams that can win a national championship and will be there at the very end when it comes to what that 12-team bracket will entail. I think they are, at the very least, a semifinalist team. So we'll give you our opinion on them a little bit later. Glad to have y'all here, man. Lots going on. As I mentioned, this is the last show for me this week. However, this show will be on tomorrow, hosted by Andy Staples. So nothing changes if you're watching live on YouTube. Nothing changes if you're listening on podcast. That will all go as is. However, my baby girl coming tonight, I guess tomorrow morning if you want to be technical about it, 1 a.m. is the time the hospital wants us there. The network/hospital aligned on the Hawaii time slot for us. They usually play in. So that's us tonight. Little PicKell After Dark. Dialed in for that one, but wanted to make sure we were all aligned here. So when you hear a new voice tomorrow on podcast or you see a new face on the YouTube screen, all good. Everything's still rolling right along. But we'll be facilitating a little bit. We'll be delegating, rather, if you will, when it comes to what this show will look like. So appreciate Andy Staples and the rest of the team here at On3 for making that go. Hey, let's get into this, man. Can't waste too much more time. Glad to have y'all dialed in. Glad to have y'all subscribed that are already a part of this. Let's waste no more time. Let's get to hotel playoff right now. So, the first level of hotel playoff, the penthouse of hotel playoff, the teams that you feel really good about as of right now when it comes to their chances to play in the postseason, this 12-team field. Oregon is sitting there with, I think ESPN gives them like a 95% chance to make the college football playoff. Now, full transparency, no idea the formula that goes into putting together a 95% chance for the Ducks. However, all of our eyes work. All of us saw what they did to Ohio State. All of us have seen the way they're trending right now across what they've done this season. So Oregon, 95% chance to make the playoff. You want to put a number to it, I probably would agree. Oregon, the best team in America right now. Resume, win over Ohio State carries a lot of weight, and it should, but Oregon, we won't spend too much time there. They're obviously a team feeling good about their college football playoff aspirations. Ohio State, kind of the same thing, man. Like, what do you really say about Ohio State at this point in time? They play Indiana, and I think a lot of us are just sort of penciling in that as a win for Ohio State. Will it be? Remains to be seen. But things get really interesting for Ohio State if they drop that game, and we're talking about, I don't know, a 10-2 Buckeyes potentially. Food for thought. But Ohio State, as of right now, with your only loss being on the last play by 1 point to the number 1 ranked team in America, you should feel pretty good about your chances, as of right now, to be in the penthouse. Texas, we're going to talk about them a little bit later in the show. Y'all, I think they are a wagon that nobody seems to be talking about. Love their quarterback in Quinn Ewers. I think that Georgia game that you saw from him was just a little bit, I don't know if fluky is the right word, but I don't think that was the all the way warmed back up Quinn Ewers that we'd come to expect. I think if you play that game again tomorrow, things could be a little bit different. However, Texas, with where they're at right now, only losses to Georgia. Georgia, before, I guess, last weekend was a top 10, top 5 caliber team. Should feel fine about your chances. Penn State, man, you should feel great about your chances as well. Like, I think Penn State, spoiler alert here, they should feel locked into the college football playoff if they win out. Now, we'll talk more about how they would stack up with some other 10-2 SEC teams a little bit later in the show, but like, same thing we said about Ohio State, I think is true for Penn State. Their loss is by 1 score. Penn State's loss isn't as good as Ohio State's loss because Oregon's the number 1 team in America, but like Ohio State being the number 2 team in America, that's fine. Penn State, handle business. When they get to the college football playoff is where I think things get really interesting. Because as much as you think Penn State's a college football playoff team, do you trust them to win a game in the college football playoff? Do you trust them to beat a team like a Notre Dame or a Tennessee should they end up playing them? That's where I think the real talking point lies with Penn State going forward. But however, this conversation is about who's in the penthouse. Penn State, as of this week, is in the penthouse. Now, Indiana, you should feel good about your chances to make the college football playoff, even if you lose to Ohio State. But if we get some madness in the SEC, I don't think you're all the way safe. So I don't know what the ESPN playoff predictor has Indiana at right now. I would just say this, barring something wild, handle business. I think you can drop the Ohio State game, but outside of that, you should feel good about your chances to ultimately make the playoff. Now, Indiana, I'm going to speak softly here. If you can beat Ohio State, I think at that point, forget whatever happened in the Big Ten title game. You're in. So playoff win and in kind of situation, if you will, for Indiana when it comes to that game against Ohio State. That'll be a lot of fun. Now, Tennessee in the penthouse this week. Only losses to Arkansas, and that Arkansas loss feels like a fever dream at this point in time if you're Tennessee after what they did to Alabama. Now, they have a chance when they go to Athens, Georgia, to essentially, I don't want to say lock up, but kind of clear the path to make the SEC title game. And if you've watched this show, you know how we feel about that. If you're in the SEC championship, even if you don't win it, both those teams, I think, are in the college football playoff. And if Tennessee makes the SEC title game, that'll be the first time since Nico Iamaleava was 3 years old. Think about the trend for Tennessee at that point. Think about where that would put them in the landscape of college football. We're talking about Tennessee being in the penthouse, not just of this year's playoff. We're talking about Tennessee being in the penthouse, I think, next year when it comes to when you talk about like those Tier 1 teams in the SEC, sure, but in college football, period. Think about what they would do for recruiting. So, like, a lot on the line here for Tennessee in this game against Georgia. Excited to see how they respond. And obviously, we're all keeping a very close pulse on the health of one Nico Iamaleava heading into that game. Now, 2 teams that just have elevated within the last week. Alabama, they were waiting on a reservation. Ole Miss, I believe they were in the lobby, but they have now elevated to the penthouse. Last night, both Ole Miss and Alabama in the top 12 when it comes to the seeding and the rankings for the college football playoff. Look at what they have ahead of them, man. Ole Miss, got Florida, Mississippi State, and a bye. Okay, you should handle business there. I know you got to play Florida, and we'll see where Florida's at when, they get them, but you do get Florida off of a bye if you're Ole Miss. So, like, you should feel good about your chances here. Handle business. If you win out, you should be in. Same deal for Alabama, man. Up from the reservation territory last week is Alabama with a massive, resounding win over LSU. Got to go to Oklahoma. You got Auburn. But again, all those games, you should be favored and probably should win if you're Alabama. So both Alabama and Ole Miss elevating into the penthouse, and I think they probably will be in the college football playoff as it stands right now. Now, Notre Dame, man. Hey, clap it up for Notre Dame. Hey, Notre Dame, congratulations. Because everybody and their mama left you for dead after NIU, except for maybe Ari Wasserman. He's been in the trenches, in the foxhole with you for a while there. But with that being said, man, the way the schedule has shaken out, I don't know if you could draw it up any better. Because I think you were banking on the Florida State game kind of being your plant the flag, here we are, put us in the playoff kind of situation. But like Florida State, with what they are, I mean, it ended up not being an issue for Notre Dame. If you look at what Notre Dame's going to have here on the resume at the end of the season, assuming Army is still ranked when you play them, you should have 4 ranked wins. And so if you're Notre Dame, man, you thank the academies for 2 reasons. Thank them for their service, and you thank them for being ranked when you played them and counting as a definitive win and honestly boosting your college football playoff resume. 11-1 Notre Dame, they're in the dance. Keep your conference title weekend to yourself if you're talking about the Irish. So that's the penthouse for you. Let's get to the lobby now. The lobby, I think, is the most interesting part of this whole discussion when it comes to the hotel playoff and how we see it. Miami's in the lobby. All right? It hurts. It hurts. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. You are a better team than Georgia Tech on paper. Now, the game is played on grass, not on paper, and you lost that game. I think you needed a little bit of this to get you going. I said it on my socials. I said it on the Sunday morning after. I think Miami needed to drop a game to get some juice, to get some sense of urgency to go on and run and make the college football playoff. You still hold your own destiny in your hands, right? Like the only difference here is your at-large status is probably not going to happen. Like I think you probably got to win the ACC to get in. But even with that being said, man, you got the head-to-head over Clemson with the Louisville win. You have the common opponent head-to-head over Clemson with that Louisville win. So just handle business, win the ACC, you're in good shape. The reason why I'm so optimistic about Miami is when you look at what they do when they have a sense of urgency to them, they're a night and day different team than what they've been in the first half of these games, if you will. Because second half Miami, man, they are number one in America when it comes to points per second half with 24. They're top 25 in America when it comes to points allowed per second half with 10 points a game. And there's, a whole bunch of teams in that top 25 that are right around the 8 to 10 range. So the bottom line here is when Miami gets behind in some of those spots and they feel that heat, they feel that pressure, they play a lot better. I think that loss to Georgia Tech removes that safety net, and I think will ultimately elevate them and allow them to play a whole lot better. So Miami are in the lobby, but I think you should feel pretty good about your chances to be a college football playoff team if you're able to flip that switch permanently now and show that second half urgency for 4 quarters. SMU, also in the lobby. Now, if you're SMU, man, you got to feel pretty good about the fact that you're not alone in this lobby. You got Miami, who we just spoke about, who's in your conference, who you are more than likely going to have to play to punch your ticket to the college football playoff. You want to talk about resumes? The loss to BYU, I guess you could qualify as a good loss, which kind of a gross word to say, a gross phrase to say. I get it. Both these teams, both Miami and SMU, control their own destiny. I don't think the ACC gets more than one in right now, but we'll unpack that a little bit later in this show. How about Georgia? That might have been the story of the college football playoff rankings reveal last night. Georgia ranked 12th. However, Boise State was ranked 13th. Boise State, the highest ranked G5 team, assuming they're the G5 champion. They find the G5, I guess, the highest ranked conference champion from the G5. They would bump Georgia out. So in a lot of ways now for Georgia, we already thought it was probably like, hey, you got to win the rest of the games to get in. It is go time right now if you're Georgia. It is put up or shut up, especially with Tennessee coming to town. We said it during our prediction. I'll say it again right now. That is the biggest game for Kirby Smart in the regular season that he's had since getting that job. All right, period, mic drop, the end. Full stop. Weird seeing them in the lobby, especially when they were preseason favorites to win the whole darn thing. But regardless, there's still a chance. There's still a chance, and I'm not betting against the idea that Kirby Smart has got one more in him when it comes to getting his team to play at the highest level when Tennessee rolls into town. Now, BYU is a team that I feel strongly about, especially if you've checked my social media in the last 12 hours. I've already said this before on the air. I'll say it again right now. BYU, according to the college football playoff seeding, would get a first-round bye, and they are within the top 10. They're ahead of schools like Ole Miss, ahead of schools like Alabama, ahead of schools like Georgia. And based on resume, I get it. I don't have an issue with it. I understand. You got the top 25 win over Kansas State. You got the win over SMU. Awesome. That's aged well. But if we're going to sit here and talk about best teams, I would take darn near, I think, every SEC team that's ranked in the top 25 to beat BYU at a neutral site, and I'd take them to cover a touchdown. Now, Missouri, okay, we'll see if we got a healthy Brady Cook. That's another discussion. But I probably would take Missouri to beat BYU, too, if we're just going to double down here. BYU, I get it. The resume, it is what it is. But are we going to pretend for a second that South Carolina with Dylan Stewart and Kyle Kennard wouldn't ragdoll them? Are we going to pretend that A&M wouldn't just abuse them up front? Are we going to pretend that Georgia and all the struggles Georgia's had this year wouldn't rock their face in? And Georgia struggled to run the football. I promise you, they would run the football at a high level against BYU. If you don't believe me there, flip it on the other side of the field. Georgia's trenches would just demolish BYU. BYU's given up 3 sacks against Utah. BYU's allowing 4.5 yards a carry on the season. This is all in the Big 12. BYU is winning games by 3 points over Oklahoma State. Don't tell me that Georgia couldn't absolutely take BYU to school and then some. And Georgia, again, would be the 13th team in this college football playoff discussion, the 12th ranked team right now. South Carolina, I already spoke to them. A&M, I spoke to them. I don't see a world here where BYU, say what you want about the resume, I get it. I'm cool with the ranking, but I'm making sure we're on the same page here. There's always, around this point of the year, a couple of teams that you point to and say, I'm not so sure about you. BYU, for me, is the team I'm not so sure about. So if they don't win the conference, I would be, I think, the loudest voice in the room saying, I don't trust them. Put them in if you want to, but I don't trust them, and we'll watch a college football playoff game where an SEC team or a solid Big Ten team, I mean, if they draw Ohio State in the first round, it'd get ugly. I'll say that right now. It would get ugly. Now, staying in the Big 12 conference, Colorado, they're in the lobby, baby. And the reason why I don't have them in the penthouse is because I think you probably get one team from the Big 12 into the college football playoff. That could be Colorado here, man. It absolutely could. They control their own destiny. You got to go and get a win against Utah. You got to go and get a win against Kansas and Oklahoma State. But like all games that I think Colorado probably will be favored in and probably should win, on paper at least, you got to finish now if you're Deion Sanders in Colorado. There shouldn't be a question of, well, can they win? Are they a good team? Are they like the floor for Colorado, I think, should be reset. They're a good football team. I said before the season, I think if they make a bowl, that's a success. I still think that was a success, but right now, Colorado is a lot better than just a team that's going to make a bowl game. We all understand that. Can they finish now against some of the best head coaches in the conference? Because Lance Leipold, Kyle Whittingham, all right, Mike Gundy, all guys that I think if you were to do a draft of Big 12 head coaches, excluding Deion Sanders, those are probably 3 of the top 4 off the board, if you ask me. So now, to bring this home here, can Colorado finish when it's time to finish? We know they can win. Can they finish? Great teams finish. Last team in the lobby here, Texas A&M. I'm very high on A&M. I'm a lot less high on them with no Le'Veon Moss. If they can still find a way to run the football at the level they did with him in the ballgame, looking at you, Daniels, looking at you, Marcel Reed, then I think A&M will be in good shape. But it all comes down to that game against Texas. Like, you fully expect Texas A&M to handle business against Auburn. Now, it is at Auburn, so we'll see what happens there, but you expect them to be the better team on that day and to beat Auburn, and then you find yourself 4 quarters away from punching a ticket to the SEC title game more than likely. And in that situation, if you make the game in Atlanta, you should make the game that ends up in that field of 12, make the college football playoff, even if you don't win. So that's the lobby for you. Now let's check on who needs a reservation. And I mentioned it. Like, if you've tuned in the last few weeks, there has been sometimes as many as like 5 teams in this discussion. But I think with us being in the month of November, a lot of teams have moved up into the lobby or just dropped out altogether. Like LSU, they are not in the need of reservation space. Now, maybe we could have a longer discussion around what LSU would need to do to find a way to get a reservation or to find a way to get back into this discussion, but they would need, I think, too much help to warrant them being in the need a reservation sector of hotel playoff. But, yeah, it's a little bit thin right now. So let's start with Clemson. True to what this part of hotel playoff speaks to, they're not out, but I think now with how much help they need, Miami would need to lose or SMU would need to lose. I don't think either of those things are happening. If it does, okay, Clemson's got new life, but with just how thin the margin for error is in the ACC and the fact that Clemson got the doors blown off of them against Louisville, they're not getting an at-large bid. They're not. So Clemson, need a reservation, not impossible, but something that you probably aren't banking on if you're a Clemson fan at this point in time. Now, Missouri, I think they need a reservation. You say, JD, Mizzou, 10-2 Missouri? Missouri that could end up being a 10-win football team and only have 2 losses. The same team that's head coach on the field said playoff hunt. Yeah, I said it, playoff hunt after they beat Oklahoma, which, again, Oklahoma, a little bit of a weird time to choose to say that. It is what it is. All for it, Coach Strink. Even at 10-2, where's the pick-me win for the college football playoff if you're not winning the SEC? Where's the game that you point to and say, hey, we really got to take a look at Missouri here? And maybe it happens this week against South Carolina. If you go to Columbia, South Carolina, that is, not Columbia, Missouri, with the game being in Willie B. If you go beat South Carolina and overcome a 2-touchdown spread, give or take, against a ranked South Carolina team, maybe that makes it a discussion. But, like, again, I have a very difficult time putting in Missouri at 10-2 over an 11-1 Big Ten team or a myriad of other 10-2 teams in the SEC that I think would be more deserving of a spot. You also have 2 really ugly losses. Here's the thing about ugly losses, man. They're tough to unsee. You know what I mean? Like, I think all of us, to some respect, think about college football teams in snapshots. To lose by 30-plus against Alabama, to get the doors blown off against you with your starting quarterback, mind you now, against Texas A&M. I get it was at A&M, but still, like, those feelings you had after seeing Missouri get body bagged, like, those feelings stick with you. And I think it would stick with the committee and the resume, how you feel about it. However you want to slice it, I don't know how you feel about Missouri going forward and how you put them in the college football playoff. So it could happen, but I just laid out all the reasons why I think they need a reservation. Washington State, man, I'm rooting for them. I'm rooting for Wazoo, man. Their Pac-12 conference closes up shop for the year, and they're more or less an independent with how this playoff discussion is going to go forward. They need to find a way to climb into that top 11, I believe, to even have a chance at the college football play, or to ultimately punch their ticket, because there's no conference that would allow them a bid. Even though they're playing a G5 schedule, they don't have a conference they're tied to where we could say, oh, they're the G5 champ. They're not. They're an independent based on how this playoff format works. Not impossible. Need some chaos, but I think it would take a doomsday scenario for Washington State to do it. Now, their loss, not the closest of losses, but still it is to the number 12 team, I guess 12 seeded, 13 team in America, which is Boise State. But it's not impossible, but I'd be a bit surprised if Washington State found themselves in the mix. Now, if you have tuned into the show in the last, I guess, month or so, then you've seen us roll out with the Big 12 logo at different points throughout the hotel playoff. We're bringing it back. Not proud of it, we're bringing it back. The reason why, I don't think you get more than one team from that conference into the Big 12 or into the college football playoff, and you got 3 teams sitting there with 2 conference losses: Iowa State, Kansas State, Arizona State. You're not getting in without playing in the conference title, and getting into the conference title requires Colorado or BYU to just totally trip down the stretch. So probably not going to happen, but the Big 12, you got 3 teams that are all rooting for some chaos, and more power to you. Now, we'll check in on the G5 party really quick because it's a good time over there, and we appreciate what they're doing. If you're Boise State, man, speaking of not tripping before the finish line, Boise State has rounded the turn. They got 100 meters between them and a college football playoff spot. You just can't trip. You just can't trip because Army, based on where they're ranked, we'll talk about them in a second, I don't think that they have enough left on their schedule to catch a Boise State. Now, if you were to definitively beat Notre Dame, maybe this discussion gets a little bit of juice. But, I mean, Caden Smith comes on here a fair amount. We talk about the G5 and the 12 seed. I think he said it perfectly. Like, if you are Boise State, in a weird way, that loss by 3 points at Oregon, the number 1 team in America, that's almost as powerful for you as some of your wins right now. So we'll see what happens there. But for Boise State, keep on fighting the good fight. Just don't fall down before the finish line. You should find yourself in the college football playoff. Spoke to Army there. It really does come down to can you do something drastic to sway the committee one way or another? Because you're undefeated. That's awesome. But your strength of schedule, as funny as it is to say, I mean, the Mountain West has been a better level of competition. Like Boise State's win over Washington State, a top 20 team. Like, okay, that's a little bit of juice there. So if you can do something against Notre Dame, maybe you beat them by double digits. Heck, can we live in a world where Army beats Notre Dame by 2 touchdowns? If we are, then we revisit this whole discussion. But I think ultimately Army probably needs some help. And then we'll throw some love their way because they were ranked last night. How about Tulane? Man? They need some catastrophe, I believe, to find their way into the college football playoff. But Tulane, they're ranked. So you're saying there's a chance. And I think Tulane, it might be small, but there's a chance nonetheless. So let's recap it here for us. Who's in hotel playoff and where are they at? In the penthouse, you got Oregon, 95% chance to make the college football playoff. I don't know how those numbers work out, but I agree. Oregon definitely sitting pretty. Ohio State, Texas, Penn State, Indiana, barring something wild. Tennessee's also in there. Ole Miss, Alabama up from the needing a reservation space, so dreams do come true. And Notre Dame as well, currently chilling out in the penthouse. The lobby, a little bit crowded, but all teams with college football playoff hopes intact. How about the ACC with Miami and SMU? The Big 12 has BYU and Colorado present, and you got Georgia and A&M also there from the SEC. Teams that need a reservation, that group becoming thinner, but you got Clemson, Missouri, and Washington State, as well as 3 other teams from the Big 12, all just hanging out there. In the G5 party, you got Boise State, Army, and Tulane, all have a chance, but Boise State definitely has got some ground that they have on the rest of the group there. All right, so a lot going on there. That's hotel playoff for you, heading into Week 12. And I told Trey Yannon, who's producing the show today, that I was going to do an ad read after the playoff penthouse segment before we did the lobby. Blew right past it, so we'll do it right now. If you've been following us over on prizepicks.com and our plays we put out on my social media, I keep saying this. I don't know if I can say, like, hey, follow us, you'll make money. But if you were to follow us, our track record would be positive enough to where, you would probably find yourself with some greenbacks. So the hard count brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks Daily Fantasy, made easy to use, easy to withdraw what you win. Again, when you use code HARDCOUNT now, just for playing $5 in lineups, you get $50 in promo funds. So that's $50 at no expense to your own real bank account you can use to go buy some Christmas presents early for your family and friends. And who doesn't love that? All right, so prizepicks.com. Appreciate y'all using that code and appreciate them for bringing you the hard count today. So this is always the best part of prepping for the show, is diving into some of your college football playoff hypotheticals, because y'all come up with scenarios that, like, honestly weren't even in the back of my mind. Like, I hadn't even considered some of these that you're throwing my way. So we'll unpack some of those right now. Let's start with Landon. He gives us a good one. He says, is there a chance now that either Indiana or Penn State get, as he says, Florida Stated, and a 10-2 SEC team takes their spot? Now, Landon, of course, referring to last year where Florida State was undefeated, didn't have their quarterback. Another discussion, but I see where Landon's coming from. Is there a way now where a team with a better record from the Big Ten Conference could get boxed out by a team from the SEC with a lesser record, but maybe it's the eye test, maybe it's the resume, maybe it's just the committee bias. You hear that this time of year. The committee, they're so biased, they love the SEC. Well, is that true? We'll see. But is that possible? Well, let's walk through what that world would potentially even look like, all right? Let's start with the Big Ten. I think it's true that the locks would be your conference champs, or your conference champ and your conference champ participant, if you will. So the runner-up or the champion are probably both in, safe to say. So let's say that's Ohio State, let's say that's Oregon. Whoever you have there as the champ, we're cool with it. But let's say that's the two you at least have locked in from the Big Ten. Let's also assume now that Chalk holds and Notre Dame wins out their 11-1, so they're in. So we're at 3 teams now that all have spots spoken for if you're keeping track at home. Let's say the same thing we said about the Big Ten is true for the SEC. You have the SEC champion and the runner-up are both in. So for those keeping track at home, we're at 5. I think the ACC is going to work itself out to be kind of nice, neat, and tidy. So we get 1 there. That's the champion. Same deal with the Big 12, champion. So as of right now, we have 7 spots accounted for, plus the G5 rep, the G5 highest-rated conference champion, highest-ranked conference champion. We'll say it's Boise State. 8 spots. All right, so we haven't gotten to Indiana or Penn State or the other teams that could be in the mix from the SEC that would be 10-2. So what would be like the disaster scenario here if you're Penn State or Indiana? Is a Tennessee being 10-2 with a loss to Georgia, Georgia being 10-2 with a win over Tennessee, getting to that mark, Texas losing to Texas A&M, they fall to 10-2. A&M, they win out. They finish at 10-2. Ole Miss is 10-2, and Alabama finishes at 10-2 as well. And oh, by the way, just sprinkle on there a little Eli Drinkwitz special. They're 10-2, and they think they should be in the college football playoff. Are any of those teams good enough in the eyes of the committee to be in over an 11-1 Indiana or an 11-1 Penn State? With this track record or this overall format laid out for us, with this college football playoff hypothetical, I think if you're Penn State, you're in. I mentioned the 10-2s. I get that. Cool. If you want to have an argument about what would happen on a neutral site, I'll hear it. But based on where they're at right now, Penn State, if they went out, they're not dropping 8 spots. They're not getting jumped by 8 other teams to find their way into the college football playoff and Penn State somehow getting boxed out. It's not happening. It's not happening. All right. So Penn State, if you're a Nittany Lion fan, big inhale, big exhale, you're good. Handle business. You control your own destiny. Forget what happens in the Big Ten Championship. Don't worry about the SEC. You're in. Now, from Indiana, you should feel confident because that's kind of how y'all roll now with Kurt Signetti calling the shots. But I don't think you sleep with 100% certainty that you're going to be in the college football playoff if your only loss is to Ohio State. Now, what have we seen from this committee now? They value the eye test. How do we know that? Well, they got Indiana ranked ahead of BYU. And I've said my piece on BYU. I don't feel the need to do that again. But BYU now has got 2 top 25 wins to their name. and they're undefeated. Indiana has 0 top 25 wins to their name, also undefeated. So why is Indiana ahead of BYU? Big Ten bias, right? No, I don't think I would say that. But I would say Indiana has been the most definitive team in America when it comes to their margin of victory. Right? They're something in the range of like 28 to 30 points is what they're beating their opponents by. BYU, you got a win over Oklahoma State by like 3 points. You need a little bit of extra BYU magic to beat Utah. Like, you hear what I'm saying? Indiana's eye test is superior to BYU's. So all that's to say, a little anecdote there to bring home the point that the committee values the eye test. So bringing it back to the idea around Indiana and their college football playoff aspirations, if that Ohio State loss is just bad, what did we say earlier in this live show about Missouri? When you saw them lose to A&M, you saw them get just 30-pieced by Alabama. Forget who was on the field and who wasn't. You had a certain feeling about Missouri in the pit of your stomach about what they were going forward. Like, the resume is one thing. Cool, they finished 10-2, whatever. Say what you want about Missouri. They're not a college football playoff team. The concern for me, if I'm an Indiana fan, is we end up losing, call it 21 points to Ohio State. I already hear you saying, we're not going to lose by 21. Okay, you asked the question. Let's talk this out here. You lose by 21 points to Ohio State. Definitively, the eye test starts to lose some points there. That would make me nervous. Because at that point now, I'm looking at some of these other teams within the SEC that we just spoke to. Every single one of them, in my opinion, has a superior eye test and could make the argument for a superior resume. Because you look at Indiana, and great, you're doing phenomenal things, beating the teams by how much you're beating them by. Awesome. But you don't have a top 10 win. Ole Miss just beat Georgia. I mean, Texas beat the brakes off Michigan. If they're that 10-2 team sitting there, and you just beat Michigan by, 5 points? And Texas went into Michigan and just absolutely throttled them? I don't think you feel good about the chance if it's Texas versus Indiana for one more spot in the college football playoff. Forget who makes the SEC title game. Any of those teams would, I think, get in over Indiana. A&M's got 2 top 10 wins to their name, I believe. Alabama's got a potentially in this scenario now. I mean, it's hard to forget what just happened in Death Valley over LSU. Hard to forget what Bama did to Georgia. Like, all the way that you walk this through, man, for 4 spots left, if you're telling me there's 6 teams within the SEC that are worthy of having a chance at that last spot, 2 of them, I suppose, are already locked up with the SEC championship game. I think that would make me very concerned if I'm Indiana, is all I'm going to say there. So we can talk through the hypotheticals of, will the tiebreakers, will the conference title games, will this, will that. All I'm saying is, if you're Indiana, you do not want it to come back to a fact where you point to the Ohio State game and you got drugged, and then you see the rest of what the SEC has, and you're like, okay, that's it's not a situation we want to be in. So, with that being said, is Indiana a lock to be in the college football playoff at 11-1? No. Do you feel good? Because is there a chance that do you feel like this is likely for us to have this many 10-2 SEC teams? I don't know if I'd say that, but I'm just saying now. You want to make the Ohio State game look as respectable as possible. If you win the game, forget what I said. But if you can just keep from being just drugged through the mud, yeah, you're going to have a chance. You're going to have a chance. All right? So, again, that's kind of it's a bit of a mental gymnastics there for those of y'all hanging with us. We appreciate it. But Indiana fans, feel good, but I don't think you feel 110% like you are a lock for the college football playoff. Now, another one of y'all hit us up with a question about how the ACC could potentially get more than one team into the college football playoff. So a conference champ plus someone else. So they hit us up and they say, okay, try on the scenario for size. Notre Dame loses to Virginia. Footnote, Notre Dame's a 23-point favorite over Virginia. So this is asking a lot right now. It's asking a lot. But if it happens, okay, let's keep it rolling. Georgia loses to Tennessee. So Georgia at this point in time is a 3-loss team. Conventional wisdom would say, well, hey, 3 losses, you're not making the college football playoff, right? All right, we'll talk about that later. That's the scenario. Georgia loses, 3 losses, we move forward. Same deal with A&M. They lose and catch their 3rd loss to Texas. Clemson and Louisville both win out. So Clemson would be 10-2. Louisville would also be 10-2, I believe. Miami beats SMU in the ACC championship. How many teams would the ACC get into the college football playoff? So there's a lot there, right? Obviously, Miami, as the ACC champ, would be in. Who else gets in? I think to look at the ACC, you got to look at what's around the ACC. So the focus here for a lot of people with the college football playoff, we'll start with the SEC because Georgia and A&M both have 3 losses. Okay, got it. Tennessee and Texas, I think you probably feel like are the teams that would get in from the SEC as a lock, with them being the teams in this scenario now that would be in the SEC championship game. Okay, so go ahead and pencil that in. Bama and Ole Miss at 10-2, I think they're in. All right, so the SEC pretty firmly gets 4 teams there, in my opinion. The Big Ten, I think, also firmly gets 4 teams in this scenario. Indiana, Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State. However you want to dial up the madness there, be my guest. I think that's how it would look. Forget who wins the conference, forget who's the at-large, whatever. You got 4 teams there, so we're at 8. I'm going to say that the G5 rep we're also factoring in here, so you got 9. Now remember, Notre Dame, they would lose to Virginia. 23 points, asking a lot, but they would lose to Virginia. So Notre Dame at 10-2, they will not be in the college football playoff. Massive, massive Jenga block. That opens up a path for another team now that we're not considering, potentially from the ACC or somewhere else, to be in the playoff. The other massive Jenga block, I think, here, that's not factored into this hypothetical, but I think we should. What happens in the Big 12? Scenario 1, if we're going to say that chalk holds and BYU plays Colorado, if BYU is undefeated in the conference champ, cool. Nice and neat and tidy. We're all good. 1 team from the Big 12 gets in. If BYU gets knocked off in the Big 12 title game by Colorado, well, BYU's resume, I think, is actually still pretty solid. And remember now, Notre Dame, they opened up a playoff spot. So I think my answer there would be, I don't look to the ACC. I look to the 1-loss runner-up of BYU, who I've said how I feel about them. It is what it is. I've said how I feel about BYU. But with the resume and based on the number of spots opened up now, you got 2 top 25 wins if you're BYU, and you got a loss to, call it a top 15, more than likely, Colorado team in the Big 12 title game. I think I'd take a 1-loss Big 12 runner-up in BYU before I took a SMU as the runner-up with 2 losses. So that's one scenario. The other potential thing that could happen here, this is where it gets real interesting, real juicy. Remember who we had losing early on in this hypothetical? Georgia, right? 3 losses. I mean, Georgia's 3 losses in this hypothetical are all to teams that are in the college football playoff. In this hypothetical, Bama, Ole Miss, Tennessee. Let's go ahead and say the Tennessee game is close. Let's say that Tennessee does have their starting quarterback, Nico Iamaleava, and you lose that game by a field goal. I think 3-loss Georgia, I don't know if they get in over a 1-loss BYU as the conference runner-up, but I think Georgia with their schedule, with the eye test, I think Georgia would have a strong case now if Notre Dame opens up that spot to be in the college football playoff. That in itself would be madness, but I think it's possible. So my answer here, to put it pretty bluntly for our ACC audience, unfortunately, I think you only get 1 team. I don't see a path where if Miami beats SMU in the ACC championship and everything happens that you just laid out, I don't see a scenario where the ACC gets more than 1 team into the college football playoff. I'm excited for us to come back to these in a little bit and just see which of these actually played out. I want to say last year we went to the idea of Florida State running the table and then still being left out, and y'all, I did not see that coming at all. So we went through that hypothetical. I think one of y'all threw it at us last year during this time, and we unpacked the hypothetical. We thought there was precedent there with Cardell Jones at Ohio State. Going down a rabbit hole here, but the bottom line is some of these things that sound so crazy that y'all are throwing at us, they're going to happen. Why? Because college football is the greatest sport on the face of planet Earth. So roll, party, roll. Now, with those college football playoff rankings coming out last night, a lot of buzz, a lot of conversation. Here's where Georgia is. That was obviously the story. Hey, Oregon's still at 1. Great. Ohio State, they're at 2, but they'd be seeded 5th. Awesome. We look through the bracket and we see where these teams are ranked. That's awesome. There's a lot of buzz around, Ole Miss and how they're moving and shaking in Alabama, and I get it. But, I think lost in the shuffle is the reality that I think Texas can win a national championship. I think their floor is to be a semifinalist team in this year's college football playoff. More on that in a second. Make sure to dial in here. A lot of y'all are watching live. We appreciate you for that. If you're watching live, There's a subscribe button under the picture. Go ahead and click that for us. But if you're watching in a YouTube one-off video, like we're not live on the air right now, encourage you also to subscribe. If you're listening on podcast, make sure you're dialed in and subscribe to the feed. So bottom line here, if you're subscribed, the best way to stay up with all things going on the show, and this show is all things college football all year long. So we appreciate you being locked in. Now, why do we feel so strongly about Texas? Because Texas, you're like, hey, they lost to Georgia. They didn't look all that great. Their best win is, you could argue it's Michigan on the road, but Michigan, I mean, they kind of fell off the wagon a little bit, right? You look at the game against Vanderbilt, at Vanderbilt, and you're like, okay, I mean, you won the game. Was it as impressive as like a national title semifinalist would look? I don't know. Here's the thing I'll say. In the college football playoff, when you get into that 12-team bracket, it's about matchups and who you draw. As of right now, Texas, if these current matchups were to hold, they would draw the winner in round 2 of Indiana or Alabama. Also keep in mind, if Texas does in fact win the SEC, all they got to do is win a game in the playoff to be a semifinalist. All right, so this is not a stretch by any reasonable imagination. So you would draw Indiana or Alabama in round 2. Y'all, for Alabama, one, I'll say I don't think this Alabama defense is nearly as good as last year's Alabama defense that you took to school in Tuscaloosa. So that's one part of this. The other part of this is I think Alabama's secondary matches up with the strength of what Texas is in their receiving core. Like, that is the worst part about Alabama's football team. Forget their defense. That secondary is what keeps you up at night if you're Kalen DeBoer. Now, it did a good enough job getting after Garrett Nussmeier because your front seven was, bringing darn near the entire game, and Brian Kelly let you know about it. But I don't like the matchup there for Alabama against Texas as we sit here right now in the month of November. Indiana, good team. Very good team. We're going to see what they are when they play better competition. But, for me, I'll take the more experienced team all day, every day. And that more experienced team is Texas. If this chalk were to hold, Quinn Ewers and Jalen Milroe are the only players that have college football playoff experience at the quarterback position. That means something. Because think about it this way. I think in the 12-team bracket, we've said this a couple times. We said this during the offseason. I think what wins in new college football playoff format is the same thing that wins in NFL playoff format. Love it or hate it, I think that's the truth. Now, what wins in the NFL? Quarterback play, right? That's probably the first thing you look at. There's a reason why the Chiefs are looking for their third Super Bowl in 3 years. Got a good quarterback. What else? Experience. We mentioned that for Texas. They are top 25 in returning production from a year ago. Even the new pieces for them have gelled quite nicely. Shout out Isaiah Bond, Silas Bolden, Matthew Golden, skill players, all looking how you would hope they would look in the preseason. Also, look at who you have at the head coaching spot, man. Steve Sarkisian. He has the experience now as a coordinator in winning national championships. I think him being on Nick Saban's staff should mean something in this situation. Also, the fact that he got this team to the college football playoff last year in the 4-team format, that should mean something. So you check the box with experience, check the box with head coach, already spoke to quarterback. Look at the defense, man. The trenches also still wins in college football. Make no mistake about it. Everyone's dinged up. Everyone's hurt. It's November. Think about where you're at with your team in December. Think about having to play a game in that first round, whether it was at home or whether you were on the road, and you got to roll over the next week and go play Texas. And that front, that team that's allowing, they're number one in America, I believe, with 3.4 yards allowed to play. They're allowing 12 points a game on defense. That's not just that Texas defense pairs nicely with the offense. This Texas defense is good enough, I think, to carry them in different spots throughout this college football playoff format, throughout this 12-team bracket. And if they were to make a run, that's what it would, I think, require. Because that's the other thing for Texas. I love how multidimensional they are. They can win a shootout against Ole Miss if they end up drawing that team. They can win a rock fight against Penn State. They can run the football. They're running the ball at 5 yards a clip. They've got great balance. There is no style of play here when you look at Texas that I would say, nope, they won't hold a candle there. I don't see it. Now, everybody can have their own bad day, and that's what we saw Texas have against Georgia, but I don't see a spot here where the experienced offensive line that has pretty much all their starters back from last year's team would be in trouble. I don't see a situation where this defense is just massively outmatched. I don't see that. So here's the biggest objection we'll hear to this opinion. That's nice, but we saw them play against a team with national caliber kind of chops, national title caliber kind of chops in Georgia, right? We saw it, didn't look good. They came to Austin, Texas. As Kirk Cousins says, walk in your trap, take over your trap. That was what happened. when Georgia came to Austin, all right? Beat them by 2 scores. And Carson Beck threw 3 picks. And still it was a 2-score game. Embarrassing, right? Here's what I would say. I think Quinn Ewers, what he is today and what he was in that game, 2 different things. Because remember now, Quinn Ewers, coming off of an injury, he had only got 1 game under his belt since the injury to play against Oklahoma. And he also didn't look that great against Oklahoma. He wasn't in rhythm. He wasn't comfortable, clearly, in the pocket. And so I think if Quinn Ewers has some continuity from week to week heading into the game against Georgia, I think he sees the picture a lot more clearly. I think the game slows down for him. I think he makes better decisions. And I think, honestly, you don't give Georgia the short field that you gave them. And still the defense, I thought, did a more than halfway decent job against that Georgia offense. Forcing 3 picks. Not bad. The second thing I would say here, if the Georgia game is really where you want to hang your hat on, if you're just staunchly against the idea that Texas could be a semifinalist team in this year's college football playoff, it's okay to get punched in the face, right? That's just a good rule in life in general, but especially in college football. In the 12-team format, it's okay to get your stuff rocked in September and October. Now, you don't want to make a habit of it, but I think getting a little bit of a come back down to earth situation and moment, I think it benefits you in this new college football world. Because what I think Texas will do from that Georgia game, and what they've done to this point since that Georgia game, is say, okay, that was humbling, that sucked, but hey, we got to be better. I guarantee you that locker room, they didn't lick their wounds and say, woe is me. They said, okay, that's what we have to go and become. We have to meet that level of aggression, physicality, intensity. We have to find a way to get there, and we're not there right now. And so for them to be able to have a moment where they fail miserably and still to have everything in front of them, I think it's only going to benefit them and serve them well, and again, create more sense of urgency down the stretch here. So Texas, I think they're complete. I love the experience. I love the way that they have a head coach who's experienced at the highest level. Love their quarterback play. I'm just telling you now, everyone's talking about Oregon and Ohio State, and deservedly so, but Texas, I'm telling you, they will be there at the end of this thing. At the very least, they will be a college football playoff semifinalist. Go ahead and lock that one in. Appreciate everyone that's been locked in, man. We got a lot going on today. I mentioned I'm going to leave from here and probably, if we're just going to be real here, go get some sleep because we got a 1 a.m. kick here for this baby to arrive. But we just appreciate y'all making this show what it is. Week 12 of the college football season. See a lot of familiar faces in the live chat. See a lot of familiar faces in the comment section. Y'all make this show what it is. Cannot thank y'all enough for it. So, from Caden Smith, Trey Annity on the 1s and 2s, for myself, JD PicKell, we love y'all. We appreciate y'all. Andy Staples hosting the Hard Count tomorrow. You don't want to miss it. We're going to keep this party rolling. We will see y'all next time.